Number 4 on my list of the Great American Read is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie in 1939. Now, before I can get into this book, I have to talk a bit more about Agatha Christie in general because it's actually quite playing against type for her, even though it might not seem like it at the surface. Now, I went on a huge Agatha Christie kick in high school. I read as much of her stuff as I could find, and because I just bought, well, I picked up Murder on the Orient Express just on a whim, and I loved it so much. I wanted to see how much more I could get, and it's all great, really. Like, she is the best-selling author of all time to date, which is probably not going to end anytime soon, and she is actually worth that. And it might be hard to see why unless you really consider the context she was writing in. It's kind of like watching a classic 70s sitcom. You feel like this has all been done before, but what you have to keep in mind is at the time it wasn't all done before, and she was developing a lot of this stuff herself. And just like those shows, what can keep you watching or reading is that she was just that good a writer. Now, her two main detective characters, Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, are not that interesting in and of themselves, but she always surrounds them with great characters who all have these very distinct personalities that bounce well off each other. And that's along with just her sheer skill at setting up these mysteries, keeps you coming back time and time again. Like, mystery really feels to me one of the hardest genres to write, and I will probably never attempt it myself because you have to keep track of what every character knows, what the detective knows, how much the reader is likely to be keeping up with all these clues. And also, you have the answer to the mystery in your head the whole time, so you have to keep in mind what the reader won't know that you do at any given point. I really don't know how anyone does it, and that she was able to do this so successfully for over 60 books is just mind-boggling to me. Now, with And Then There Were None, we have a book where the typical detective character does not exist. You have only the side characters, and they're stuck with this mystery and have to try to figure it out all on their own. And as you might imagine, with her being so good at writing these characters, it gets fun really fast. And just seeing all the different ways that these bunch of people can keep bouncing off each other in different combinations, each with their own ideas as to who is having them trapped on this island and killing them off one by one. So you have the ticking clock and just tensions running high the whole time. And it's really something to see. I'm being as vague as possible here because the real joy of this book is just finding out who everyone really is, although it's clear early on that none of them are very good people. So it's kind of like a proto Hateful Eight, really. And so you have this just bucket of scorpions where no real characters can be identified with or sympathized with because they've all done terrible things. And really, the whole book is them getting their just desserts. But which of them is actually the one pulling it off? It will absolutely keep you guessing right up until the end. And I really can't recommend this one enough. It's one of her best-selling books of the best-selling author of all time, and that should tell you something right there about just how readable it still is. Now, something I do have to address a little bit is that Christie was still an author of her time, and that means that you occasionally have to deal with some really uncomfortable racism and sexism and other like ideals of the 30s and 40s and a bit more onward. Now, I'm absolutely not one to ever say that you should overlook these things because of the time, because then what's the point of having your own opinion about anything? But all I can really say is the stories are good enough for the most part that I just was able to barrel through them, even how much of a distaste they left in my mouth. And it does help with And Then There Were None that Christie's original title, which I will not say out loud ever, is not the one that it's known by these days. Look it up if you're curious, but don't blame me if you get really offended really fast, and maybe you never want to read anything else by her again. Who knows? But uh, just give it a try. Maybe hold off on looking up the title until afterward if you're really nervous about it, because it is absolutely worth reading. It still holds up remarkably well in even with the title. That's really the only thing in this particular book that's uncomfortable these days, which also helps a lot. I won't give away any of the ending or the characters or their backstories. Just read it yourself, have a good time. You will, I imagine, because she is just that good, and she deserves to be held up as one of the greats, even if we might wish her own value system were a bit less of the time she was writing in. Up next, we see how a sense of humor can help a lot in making what would seem to be a dull as hell story actually very readable with Anne of Green Gables.